Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream session with immigrationquestions.com, where we break down US immigration in real time with the help of legal professionals. We are so glad you could join us today. So, today we are talking about one of the most critical and often nerve wracking parts of the US immigration process, the USCIS interview. Whether you are applying through a business visa, joining a loved one through a family based petition, or seeking protection under a humanitarian program like asylum or the U visa, the USCIS interview is where your story, your paperwork, and your credibility are all tested in real time. And here's the truth, many strong application falters simply because the applicant wasn't properly prepared. Knowing what to expect, how to present your case, and how to handle difficult questions can make a huge difference in the outcome. That's why today's topic is how to prepare for the USCIS interview. So, to help us unpack this today is with an experienced attorney. He is the managing attorney at Casa Law in New York, where he focuses exclusively on immigration law. He's known for his client centered strategic approach, helping individuals, families, and employers navigate the US immigration system with both clarity and compassion, from temporary visas to permanent residency and naturalization. Devan is all about smart, human focused legal solution. Welcome with me, Attorney Devan Gandhi. You are welcome, Attorney Gandhi. We are thrilled to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Justin, for that nice introduction. I am excited to be here and I'm excited for today's topic. And I think as an immigrant myself, I personally connect with this because I've been through the interview process. So I'm excited to talk about it today and help your audience as much as I can.
Awesome. Let's dive right into it. To everyone watching across platforms, grab your notepads because we are going deep today. So let's jump right in. So, Attorney Gandhi, for someone who's never done this before, what exactly should they expect during a USCIS interview?
So if someone has never been to a USCIS interview, here's how I would describe it. It is more formal than a job application, like a job interview, but less formal than going to immigration court. So that's how I would picture it. And I'm gonna walk the audience through what an actual interview is like. So the first thing that happens is they will check into the security at the federal building, the USCIS building. I usually tell my clients, get there a little early. You're going to go through security. It's going to be like the airport where you have to remove your belt, your shoes, all of that stuff, and then go through the security scanners, and you will go up to the floor wherever the USCIS interview is being held. You're going to check in. They're going to give you a number, and then you'll just sit and wait to be called. And sometimes you're waiting a long time. You can even wait up to like 3 hours before they call you in for an interview. Now, the second part is that the interview is going to be conducted by a USCIS officer. The first thing the officer is going to do is going to ask for your ID. Then they're going to swear you in. So they're going to ask you to lift your right hand and swear you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And then the officer will sit you down. Then the officer is going to ask you questions, first about your identity, then about the immigration application. So whether it's a family, a business, or a humanitarian-based case. And then the office is going to review your inadmissibility questions. So questions relating to the security, whether you are able to get the green card or not. And then as far as things to bring to the interview, I always, again, it really depends what the case is. But the most important thing you have to bring is your interview notice, because otherwise they're not going to let you into the building. Bring your passport, ID, things like that, so that you can verify your identity. And then I always just tell my clients not I tell my clients, but you're supposed to bring all your original documents with you. So your birth certificate, your passport, your divorce certificate. So all of the original documents, bring them with you. Bring a copy of your application package. And then this is also really important because sometimes your interview is maybe a year or a year and a half after you filed it, or in the case of an asylum, it could be maybe 4 or 5 years after.
Mhm.
You want to be able to bring updated evidence with you. So those are things that you will bring. And then the final thing is, for anyone who's not been to an interview, let's talk about how long it will last. Interviews usually last anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours, but sometimes they can go up to 3 hours as well. Now, this is just the interview itself. Again, like I said, while waiting, you could be waiting in the waiting room for 2 to 3 hours more. So I always tell my clients, keep your whole day free. And then as far as the interview itself, it also really just depends on the officer. I
Mhm.
like it when I get a more experienced officer because I know they're not going to go question by question by question. Whereas a newer officer is going to read everything by the book and they're going to ask you all the questions they have. So could go anywhere from 1 hour to 3 hours. And then at the end of the interview, USCIS doesn't tell you whether your case is approved or not. They're going to tell you, like, okay, we're done with the interview today. I'm going to hold your case for a final review. And then um, you're going to receive a notice in the mail with the decision of your case. So that's one thing that it's important for all the audience to know as well, that you're not going to get your results the day of the interview. So that's the
That
process. What the interview is like.
that's very helpful. So now interview can vary depending on the visa type, right? So how does preparation differ for the business visa applicant versus someone coming through a family petition?
Sure. So the preparation is going to be very different because one, with the
Mhm.
business visa, the employment-based visas, these are more about the employment itself. So, for example, if you're going to a business-based interview,
Mhm.
then you are going to prove that the job itself is real, it's ongoing. Things that you would bring is, for example, the employment letter. And if you're already working for the company, you'll bring pay stubs. You will also bring companies' financial documents to show that they are able to actually pay you. So you need to prove that they have the ability to pay. Now, one caveat about business-based visa applications or interviews is that in the United States, you only get interviewed for the employment-based green cards. So if it's a O visa or a L1 visa, these
Mhm.
interviews don't happen in the United States. They are only required if you are doing consular processing abroad. In the United States, all the non-immigrant business visas are all approved by USCIS without an interview. So that's the one caveat. So when you're going for the green card interview based on employment, so you will need to know your job description. You have to be able to say what you're doing, what the company is, and then again prove that the company has the ability to pay you. And then the other part of the employment-based green card application, or all green card applications, like I said earlier, is that they are going to review whether you are inadmissible into the United States. So if any of you have filed an I-485, which is the adjustment of status application, at the back there is about 60 to 70
Mhm.
questions to see whether you are admissible into the United States or not. These include questions like, have you ever murdered anyone? Have you ever tortured anyone? Are you coming to practice polygamy in the United States? So they will go through all these questions with you. They're not going to ask you all 60 to 70 questions. Usually it's about 10 to 15 that they'll ask you. So that's the business or the employment based green card interview, and that's how you prepare for that. Now, for the family based immigration interview, now this is all about the relationship. And this could be whether it's a parent child immigration interview or a spousal interview. So, if we're talking about the spouse interview, then again, you want to make sure that you bring all the evidence about the relationship with you. So
Mhm.
if you filed the applications 9 months ago and then now you have an interview schedule, you want to bring updated documents to show the bona fides of the relationship. So for example, you want to bring your joint bank statements. If you filed taxes jointly, bring those with you. If you've moved houses and you have a new lease, you want to bring that with you. The one thing that everyone loves with the family-based visas are pictures. So if you've traveled anywhere, if you've been with family and friends, take pictures, bring those with you. the two most important things that US immigration looks at with family, from my experience, is one, they want to see joint finances, and then two, they want to see joint residence. If you have a kid, that's the number one factor that that it's a real marriage, right? So
Yes.
if you have a kid, bring that birth certificate with you. This is a little secret I tell some of my clients. If it's a really small baby and they can't get a babysitter, bring the baby with you, because then the interview might actually be shorter. So these are some of the differences, how you prepare for them. Now, for the family-based interview, I think here and later, I know we're going to talk about some of the red flags or what you can do to best
Yes,
prepare
yes.
yourself. But the one thing I always notice is sometimes people are like, you know what, my marriage is real, my relationship is real. I don't need to practice. Like, why, what do I have to practice to show that my relationship is real? But then when you get to the interview and the officer asks you, where'd you go on your first date? How did you meet? Things that maybe 4 years ago, this happened. If you don't practice, the two of you might give conflicting answers, and that's one of the biggest red flag if the two of you are not prepared to answer these questions. Which again, if you just do a quick Google search, you can find these questions and just prepare yourself as well
Yeah.
before the interview. So preparation is key for both applications, for both types of business or family based, but that's how I would say it differs.
That's very helpful at any Gandhi. So that brings us to the another important area, that is humanitarian cases. So what unique challenges do applicants for asylum, U visas, or other humanitarian categories face during these interview, and how can they best prepare emotionally and legally?
Yes, that's that's actually a really, really good question. Um, with the humanitarian-based visas, and again, just as an overview, the humanitarian-based visas are basically visas such as these are for visas who for people who have been either um,
Mhm.
victims of persecution, or they've been victims of abuse, or they could be children who've been abandoned or neglected by one or both parents. So this could include U visas, SIGIS, VAWA applications, and asylum. One thing I do want to say, it really depends what kind of application, but if you're talking about the asylum application, all asylum applicants are interviewed at a USCIS office.
Mhm.
Whereas for a U visa, there's really usually no interview until the time when you file for the green card. For special immigrant juvenile status or SIGIS, these are a multi-step process. So the first place you'll go to is family court, then you'll file with immigration, and then usually you don't have any interview and everything's decided on the paper after you file the SIG visa application. So, not for VAWA, which is for victims of abuse, spousal abuse in the United States, these usually don't get interviewed, and you perhaps get interviewed for the green card. But since December of 2024, there's a new trend where USCIS are starting to require interviews for VAWA applicants as well.
Okay.
The reason why this is just a little concerning is usually when an application is already decided by USCIS, when you've already filed the VAWA application and you're going for the green card interview, they're just going to ask you questions about the green card. But now, what could happen is they could ask you questions about the abuse you suffered as well. So, again, this is just kind of like a general overview of the humanitarian visas. Now, let's talk about the difference or the unique challenges they face.
Mhm.
For humanitarian visas, like I said, these are humanitarian based applications. So, they are more emotionally texting a little bit taxing, a little bit more complex than the other two areas, and so applicants usually need to really understand their why they qualify for the application. So some of the things that they, for example, if you're going for an asylum interview, some of the things that you need to show is that you have a fear of returning to your home country because you're going to be persecuted. Now,
Mhm.
the problems that they could face is one, memory gaps. So asylum applications, they can really differ as far depending on which administration, whether they're going to get an interview in 3 weeks, or I have cases from 2017 who are still waiting, clients from 2017 who are still waiting for an interview. So imagine filing an application in 2017, getting an interview in 2025, and you're supposed to remember everything that's on your application. So it's a lot of that memory or inconsistency that could happen. Another thing is language barriers. So if your first language is not English, And with a lot of immigrants, our first language is not English. So having
Yes.
to explain yourself with the help of an interpreter can be very troubling, especially if the interpreter interprets it wrongly. Because then, it could be an inconsistency with what's on your affidavit to what they are translating for you. So that's a language barrier. It's a second, I think, unique challenge. Third is, again, just reliving trauma. I think after 6 7 years or even after 2 months, having to relive trauma can be very hard, and people respond to trauma differently. So sometimes people like to just block it off completely from their memory, and other times they react differently, or they react quite emotionally to
Mhm.
reliving the trauma. So having to manage their emotions as well. And I think, let me see, let me just think about two more things that I think we can talk about is the lack of evidence. So for asylum, for example, most people who are fleeing asylum, they don't think, okay, let me gather this evidence and that evidence and this evidence, then I'm going to pack my bag and run and flee my country. They just flee. And so usually when a client comes to me and they're telling me they want to apply for asylum, they just left the country with just the clothes on their back or like a backpack. So then we have to work. The most important part for them is their affidavit and their declaration. So sometimes with lack of evidence, USCIS will look at that negatively, but that's when preparing with the attorney is so important. And I think that's how I would categorize how the humanitarian based visas are a little bit different than,
Mhm.
actually, are very different from both the family and the business employment cases.
That's very insightful. So now let's talk about mistakes. What are some of the most common red flags or mistakes you have seen during interviews that people should avoid at all costs?
Yes. Number one, I would say, is the lack of supporting evidence. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I know I just talked about the
Yes.
humanitarian based
Yes.
visas and the lack of evidence, but I think here specifically, I'm referring to, say, a marriage based immigration application. If you go to a marriage based visa and you forget to bring things such as your original documents, like your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, your passport, or you forget to bring proof of joint documents, these are all evidence of your relationship. And at the interview, it's kind of like your final time to be like, okay, I've showed you before, and I'm bringing all of these new evidence with me to show my relationship is real. So I would say that is one, is just the lack of supporting evidence. Number two is just inconsistent answers. So at a marriage interview, most of the time they interview the applicants together.
Mm-hmm.
And they will ask each spouse the questions, and you're supposed to just answer. And your answer has to be similar to each other, right? And so that is one thing. And then also the whatever's on your application itself needs to be what you are answering the day of the interview. So, and knowing your address histories, knowing your immigration history, these are also important. So just making sure that you understand and give consistent answers. Third would be, now this is a problem, I think generally, is when people sound practice too much. So I know I say prepare, but don't over prepare, because then come off as a robot, right? Like all your answers are so
Mm-hmm. Yes.
well crafted. USCIS's job, or the office's job during the interview, is to make sure that there is no fraud. And when you are too perfect, it might raise some red flags. So you wanna not re or memorize all your answers line by line. You just want to make sure it's natural and that it flows. All right. And then the next red flag, I think, would be just lying or guessing or just not telling the truth, because that
Okay.
is the worst thing that could happen if you were to lie during an immigration interview, because the consequences of answering and just saying I don't know rather than lying is very different. Because if you and actually, if you use fraud, or you miss or you give misstatements about your history or your immigration history to get an immigration benefit, that could make you inadmissible to the United States. So if you get caught lying, they could charge you with fraud, and then you are not going to be able to apply for that immigration benefit without a waiver. All
Mm-hmm.
right.
Yes.
Um, Let me see. This one, it's I think it would be if something important has happened. So if you got divorced and you're going to a marriage-based visa interview, you obviously have to say that things have changed. I'm divorced now, or like just recently, I went to a marriage-based visa interview, and my client's the U.S. citizen petitioner passed away a few weeks before the interview, so we had to bring proof of the death certificate and asked to convert to a widower's petition. So again, just make sure you update USCIS with all the changes. And
Mhm.
then this one, I would say, super important. Make sure that you are respectful to the officer. Sometimes these interviews are very stressful, so people react differently. And I would say, just make sure you get enough sleep the night before. Make sure you go for a walk the morning off and just relax yourself first before going to the interview. I tell my clients, the officer, usually they are quite neutral, um, and even if they are, I would say what your job is also to remain neutral. So
Mhm.
the officer can be super friendly. You don't want to get too friendly because you got to understand that it's still a immigration interview, or they could be hostile. And at that point, I would say your job is to just make sure that you remain calm. Now, this is where it's important to have an attorney at the interviews, because sometimes when the officer is a little bit too hostile, that's when the attorney will step in and say, "Hey, get me a supervisor." So it's good to have an attorney because the attorney can go full Karen mode. But otherwise, just I would say tell my clients to just try and remain as calm as possible. Um, and then finally, I think I may have already said this before, but just
Mhm.
prepare. Inadequate preparation could lead to a bad result the day of the interview. So those are some of the red flags and some of the ways to kind of overcome that.
That's very insightful points that you have mentioned. So now to our amazing audience, thank you for joining us. If you are tuning in from any social media platform, we are excited to have Attorney Gandhi, an experienced immigration attorney who has contributed significantly for today's topic. So this is immigrationquestions.com, a platform designed to simplify the immigration process. Ask your immigration question for free in any language and get connected with a verified attorney who can offer legal guidance. You may also receive a free confidential initial consultation. Visit www.immigrationquestions.com and sign up today. So, very quickly, Attorney Gandhi, for a platform that seeks to aid the immigration journey of every documented and undocumented immigrant by connecting them with seasoned immigration attorney like yourself, what do you think of immigrationquestions.com and what we do for the immigrant community?
No, I think it's really important that immigrants, documented, undocumented, all immigrants have access to attorneys to
Yes.
answers to their questions. So obviously, a platform like yours, it's an important tool that immigrants could take advantage of.
Thank you for that. So before we jump into our live Q&A, one last question. Let's say the interview did not go as hoped. So what can applicants do next? Is there a way to respond to a negative outcome or request for more evidence?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing is, and I think I mentioned earlier, during the interview, you're not going
Mhm.
to know whether you pass or not, unless it's for your citizenship interview. You will know the day off whether you pass or not. But for all the other immigration interviews, the officer is going to say, "I'm going to review it. I'll let you know within 2 weeks." Now, two things could happen. One, you could be denied the application, or you could get a request for evidence, meaning they need more proof. Um, Number one is just remain calm. Um, Now let's talk about the request for evidence first. Actually, three things could happen. If you're applying for a marriage-based visa interview and you bomb the first interview so badly that you just don't want to show your face anymore. Good thing is U.S. immigration allows for applicants to come back for a second interview. This is called the Stokes interview. The Stokes interview is a little bit more scary because what they're gonna do is they're gonna separate the couple. They're gonna ask one couple a set of questions, and they're going to ask the other couple a set of questions, the exact same questions, and they're going to compare your answers. So that is going to be a scary second interview, but again, not impossible to pass. So that's for the marriage-based visa applications. Let's talk about an RFE or a denial. If you get an RFE, it just really depends what the officer wants. Sometimes this could be something as simple as, hey, we want to see more proof of your current employment, that you are earning this money, this much money that you can sponsor your your foreign immigrant spouse. So they could maybe just want updated pay stubs or the latest tax returns if you forgot to file it. Now, it could also be a little bit more intense where they want to see more proof of, say, the relationship, or more proof of the, well, I guess it would be the relationship, and then they'll ask you to submit more joint documents. And then, so that's how you will do. What you're going to do is, obviously, the best way, I would say, if you get an RFE, that's the time where you should get an attorney, if you don't have one already, because if you get denied, then you will have to either restart or file an appeal. So now let's go to the second option, which is, if you do get denied for the immigration benefit that you applied for, you have the opportunity to appeal the denial. But I tell my clients, again, if look at what the reason for denial is. To appeal, the cost is high and it may take longer. Sometimes it's just much quicker to just refile the application, obviously correcting whatever was missing in that first application and just refiling it. So that's what I would do if a client comes to me and said, "Hey, the case is denied. What do we do right now?"
Oh, that's very understandable. So, to our audience, the floor is now open for Q&A, questions and answer. Please type your questions into the chat box and we'll address as many as possible. If you want to call us live and ask your questions directly, dial 516-703-3483. So the question will appear here on the screen. The first question is from Joanne Rodriguez. For U visa, do I need to bring the original police report to the interview?
Hi, Juan. So no, again, with U visas, these are all decided on the application itself. So by USCIS without an interview. So when you apply for U visa, you will need to submit the police report and all of that, and the police certification. But as far as an interview, there really isn't an interview for the U visa itself. So, like I said earlier, right now the humanitarian-based visas. They are interviewing for asylum applicants and VAWA applicants.
Okay, correct. So the second question is from Anika Kaur. We did a court wedding last year but had a ceremony this year. Will I explain both events in the interview or I should only mention the court wedding date?
Yes, so let me see. So you had court wedding. All right. So great question, and that actually happens super often, which is that the controlling date is the legal marriage. So it would be the court wedding or the city hall wedding when you get the marriage certificate and the marriage license. So that is the date that you will use for all the application. And then during the interview, so just a little insight on what are the questions they will ask. They will ask you about your wedding. So they'll ask you, when were you married? If they ask you that, then you will say, our wedding date, or our legal marriage was on this date, and then we had a ceremony a year later on this date. And then they'll ask you to tell them who was at the ceremony, what did you do to celebrate, did you guys go out to dinner? So you will need to know all those details. But yes, during the interview, you will mention both, and even if you don't, they'll ask you about it.
Okay. So the next question is, what happens if I did not include some threats I faced in my asylum application, but I remember them now? So can I add that in the interview?
Yes. So you can. The one thing that I would say is that asylum applications, again, they are more scrutinized, and so details matter. If it's something really big, that you should have known from the very beginning, then it should have been included in your application. But if it's something, minor, where it's, people can just forget about it and then you remembered it later on, you can just bring it up during the interview. But better still, I always say, depending on when you filed the application, say it was 7 years ago, throughout the years, you can still work with your attorney or work, by yourself to keep gathering to gather evidence. And so as part of the evidence packet, you'll also include your affidavit. You can either have, if you have not sent the affidavit initially, then you can update the affidavit. But if you've already filed an affidavit with the first filing, then what I would recommend is just add an addendum or an additional affidavit with the extra events that happened so that you can give it to the officer the day of the interview.
Understood. And the next question is, my husband and I live apart because of work. Will that be a problem when they ask about our living situation?
Yes, that is a really, really good question, Lorado. And I feel like I'm telling this to everyone that's asking the questions, but this is something that is becoming more and more common. So, for example, right now I have clients in Texas. One is in, I think, Houston, and another one in another state, another city. They are not living together, and the reason being is because of work. The Will it be a problem? Hmm. Not necessarily if you can explain it. So the thing I would do is you want to show proof of you visiting each other often. So whether it's you're living in the same state or different states, you want to be able to fly back and forth to see each other or drive back and forth. You want to take trips. You want to show that you are still calling them and messaging them. So getting those call records, getting those text messages, screenshots of them to show that, you know what, even if you're not living together right now, we still communicate often. And then the final part to that is just making sure you have an end goal. So if you are just currently living apart, then having a statement that you both sign stating that, hey, we are living apart right now because of work or medical reason, but we do plan to live together in the future. And in fact, now we are looking for an apartment that we can purchase or rent. And then you can include, for example, screenshots of you looking for apartments. So you can explain it. It doesn't mean it's the end of the process, but you are going to face a bit more scrutiny and you have to be able to explain yourself.
That's
Great
helpful.
question.
Yes, yes. So another question is, what if I can't remember every date from my work history when they ask me during the interview?
Yes. So it depends what kind of application you're applying for. So if this is based on a family-based application, then it really doesn't matter as much because your work history is all in the application itself. So they're not gonna expect you to remember every single work you've done. If it's in the employment context, you want to know roughly the dates. You don't need to know exact dates, but you want to be able to say, yes, I worked for 2 years at this company, 3 years at this company, and now I've been working for my current company since August 21st, 2021. You need to know your current company the most if it's an employment based visa. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes. Very well. So the question is, do I need to bring photo albums for IR1 visa interviews?
Yes. So, and I'm guessing this is a consular processing
Mhm.
interview. So this is, where you are abroad and you're going to the U.S. consulate for the interview. Yes, you want to bring proof of your relationship. I always tell my clients 30 to 40 photos, bring that with you. Photo albums, not really necessary, but what you want to make sure is that it's easy for the officer to get it. The way I say it is if you have the way we usually prepare it is if it's a photo album, get ones that has a description that you can write on so that you can say, okay, this photo was taken August, whatever, this year at this location, and who else was in the photo. So bring your photo album with you. Also know that sometimes the officer will take 2 or 3 photos away to keep it for their records, but definitely bring photos. Oh,
Okay.
and then one more thing about the photos is that you want to make sure they cover a variety of events. So whether you're at home, whether you are out on a date, whether you're with friends and family celebrating something, whether it's New Year's, all the days of the wedding, you want to have a bit of pictures from each event and bring that with you.
Understood. So the next question is, I chat to a live agent today about my I-48 485 concurrently. She said, I'm in question to be interviewed, but it's only been 2 months, 2 weeks so far. Do you think I will be scheduled for interview date soon?
Yes, Damien. So this is one thing that everyone will learn really quickly about USCIS is that sometimes the things on the website and what the life agent says are so different, and you should just not really trust anything. The number one way for you to see when your interview date is that you're going to receive the notice. And usually you'll receive the notice 1 month before the actual interview. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, can I request days off from work or not? You'll get it 1 month before the interview. Now let's talk about processing timelines right now. This is very interesting because 3 years ago, it took about 1 year. Last year, most of my clients were getting their approvals between 4 to 7 months. Um, and the great thing was last year, all the interviews were being waived. So if you submitted a strong application, you will get an approval. Then the officer may be able to approve your case without actually going to the interview. Now, this year, they have reversed the policies a little bit. Basically, they're requiring interviews for all applications. And I thought that was going to make cause a further delay, but I've been hearing that attorneys of my colleagues have been telling me that some of their clients were getting interviews within 2 months. So I would say this year the timeline is more 2 months to a year. That's kind of like, I mean, I know it's not, it's hard to say what that means, but yeah, 2 months to a year. And then it's good that the officer said that your case is in the queue to be called for an interview, but we just really don't know when the interview will be. Yeah, I really can't tell because it could be on the queue for months. That's what I would say. But the general timeline, 2 months to a year right now, is what I
Okay,
would
got it.
anticipate.
Okay, so I think that was the last question. So that brings us to the end of the today's session. Thank you for joining us, and huge thank you to our returning guest, Attorney Devin Gandhi, for sharing such practical and actionable guidance today. So we hope this webinar helped demystify how to prepare for USCIS interview. Don't forget you can rewatch this session or catch previous episodes on Spotify. Just research for Borderless Talk by immigrationquestions.com. So join us next week for another deep dive into employment-based immigration. We'll be discussing Megan Kishnow with work visas in 2025. What you are not being told about H1B, TN, and L1 option. You won't want to miss it. So once again, thank you, Attorney Gandhi. We look forward to having you back on the show very soon.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you everybody for your questions. They were great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.